Well, we want to welcome everybody to this webinar sponsored by the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship. Our topic today is uh, the development of entrepreneurial ecosystems in the Global South and some of the complex issues that surround those ecosystems. The Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship is a network of scholars, policymakers, economic development professionals, NGOs, and others interested in the interface between poverty and entrepreneurship. Um, we support a portal that summarizes the research that's done at this interface, that highlights some of the teaching efforts around the globe focused on poverty and entrepreneurship, and um, also introduces a large number of uh, impactful community engagement initiatives around the world that work with low income and disadvantaged entrepreneurs as they attempt to create viable ventures. It's free to join, and all are welcome. We also support 3 webinars a year on cogent topics, pressing issues at the poverty and entrepreneurship interface. And today our focus is on ecosystems and the global south. Before I introduce our illustrious panel, I want to provide a little bit of foundation. So allow me, please, to share some slides. The format will be I'm going to do a bit of an introduction. We'll go to questions that I will direct at the panelists, and then we welcome questions from the audience. You can post these questions in the chat. We'll monitor those and hopefully try to get to everybody's questions or perspectives in the 75 minutes that we have. And so let me start off by just giving some very basic background. I'm going to share some slides here. Is that in presentation mode? Are you seeing that?
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. Um, so the issue we're going to open with is the whole question of what is an ecosystem and what does it consist of. And if I sort of synthesize different perspectives, it might be argued that ecosystems have 3 um, le levels of components. Basic infrastructure, which is a huge issue in much of the global south. Um, Local entrepreneurial support elements, and then many perspectives on ecosystems talk about institutional influences on the ability to start and grow a business. And so uh, basic infrastructure concerns issues like roadways, financial structures, power, water, um, the educational system that's available, the kind of security, um, fire services, the IT infrastructure in a country or in a community, um, where the community entrepreneurial support can include everything from uh, chambers of commerce that support entrepreneurs to local incubators to the existence of microcredit programs and other forms of financing, conventional bank loans, uh, can include forums for entrepreneurs and other more community-based forms of support for venture creation. And then at an institutional level, we might be talking about the everything from the role of religion and religious institutions and corresponding values that constrain or facilitate entrepreneurial activity, educational systems, the regulatory environment, the relative support for informal sector kind of ventures, the nature of the basic economic structure. So that covers a lot of territory. At the same time, we use this word ecosystem when many might question whether there's any comparison of an entrepreneurial ecosystem to a biological ecosystem. But the point is, from a systems perspective, there tend to be in all ecosystems gaps and holes. Um, it it the presence of any kind of governance or coordinating mechanisms, the extent to which ecosystems include entities that operate as silos and are not that collaborative or duplicate effort. Um, and certainly the global north, we frequently find a preoccupation with growth-oriented, scalable, and often technology-based businesses. Um, and a key characteristic of so-called ecosystems is their inclusiveness. And so the extent to which they do or don't serve the needs of women entrepreneurs, of minority entrepreneurs, the extent to which they reflect the distinct requirements of those in poverty, which of course is a huge issue in the global South. An interesting question, and I'm hoping we could get perspective on these, is the extent to which ecosystems sort of organically emerge or can be engineered, can be designed, and the direction they take affected. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more about how they organically evolve. Um, when we talk about the global South and we think about ecosystems, a key question in my mind, at least, is the role of poverty. And well, that's not the focal issue today. There is tremendous poverty in the global South and significant levels of entrepreneurial activity amongst the poor. And so when we start to think about the ways communities could support especially low income and disadvantaged entrepreneurs in the global South, it seems we've barely scratched the surface in terms of the possible ways that the poor could be better served through ecosystems, whether that's with space for their businesses, whether that's access to incubators or accelerators, mentor programs, cooperative procurement kinds of setups, access to the sharing economy, and the list goes on, and unique and novel forms of microcredit. If we think about policy and these entrepreneurial ecosystems, a very interesting question to me, at least, is if you think of the policy toolkit, the range of policy uh, tools at the disposal of legislators and elected bodies and politicians, it's an interesting mix of possibilities. The question whether it's regulatory policies or government procurement programs or what have you. The interesting question, I think, when it comes to ecosystems is the extent to which public policy should be targeting entrepreneurs and their ventures, or perhaps public policy should be targeting ecosystem development, which in turn serves these entrepreneurs. And so then if we have this mix of community kinds of elements and policy and regulatory kind of elements, how might we hope to achieve any kind of organization or coordination of the set of things available to affect entrepreneurship? This brings us to our panel, and I'm so pleased to welcome to share their perspectives three scholars that have done extensive work in the area of ecosystem development. First, we want to welcome Erik Stam, who's a professor of strategy, organization, and entrepreneurship at the Utrecht University School of Economics in the Netherlands. Stephen Mago, who's a professor and head of Department Development Studies at Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And Jonathan Mukiza P. Kansheba, who's an assistant professor of international business at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. So welcome all to this conversation. And if I could start off by simply asking each of our panelists that if they would share their perspective on exactly what we mean by an entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Thank you, Mike. Is there an order who should start and who should finish, or?
Oh no, I just jump in where you're comfortable.
All right. All right, I will start. Maybe the younger, and then I reserve the best to the elders and my elders. Okay. If you ask me what's an entrepreneurial ecosystem, this has been like my 6 years of researching into entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I remember the very first thing that I started doing during my early stage of my PhD was to kind of looking into a clear definition and difference between entrepreneurial ecosystem as a concept versus other prior old concepts like industrial districts, innovation districts, and clustering. Because every time when we present about entrepreneurial ecosystem, people would ask you, what's the difference between entrepreneurial ecosystem versus the older concepts like clustering and innovation districts? So on my case, during all those first days of researching what entrepreneurial ecosystem is, I came to realize the difference is on the focus of entrepreneurial ecosystem itself. So the focus of this concept is on empowering entrepreneurs. Unlike the older concepts where you find the clusters and districts and innovation system, they most of the time speak about larger companies or international established companies. So entrepreneurs and their venture become like trivial, debated in those kind of structures. So the EE then comes as a booster to really focus on the real needs of entrepreneurs and their ventures. So that's a little understanding of how I can differentiate between entrepreneurial ecosystem versus other older concepts.
Stephen, how do you approach an entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Jonathan, for that. Yeah, you see, entrepreneurial ecosystems, like what Jonathan was saying, they is more like a new perspective, which builds on different from clustering and industrial hubs, where these organizations probably would just sit close to each other without a deliberate effort to collaborate. But with entrepreneurial ecosystems now, it's the focus is collaboration, to say how do actors in a complex environment work together. And with the traditional forms, the idea was probably grouping like terms, those organizations that probably are in the same sector could come together But with entrepreneurial ecosystems, the idea goes beyond grouping organizations in the same sector or companies in the same sector. So companies in the organizations or businesses in the different sectors can actually be part of the ecosystem because of that complex interaction that will benefit all the actors in business. So you may find members in the retail sector, manufacturing sector, financial sector coming together in an ecosystem. So that will provide a kind of a holistic business environment where these entrepreneurs can support each other in one way or the other. So it's a deliberate effort where these members have to come together. But like you were saying in your presentation, it can also be organic. Yes, it can be engineered, but it can also be organic. It develops naturally in a setting where these members are interacting and benefiting each other.
Thank you. And Erik, you've done a lot of work that sort of focuses on the systems component of ecosystems. Could you share a bit of your perspective on what we're talking about?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and great to be on the panel, Mike. So the African saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child, and in that sense, it also takes a village to raise a venture. But of course, we would like to have somewhat more academic terms, and if you put it in academic terms, we need a well-functioning, complex economic system to understand why some places have more productive entrepreneurship than others. And to put it even in more abstract terms, and then I'll make it more concrete, let's say the group of scholars that I'm collaborating with, we have defined an entrepreneurial ecosystem as an interdependent set of actors and factors that are governed in such a way that they enable productive entrepreneurship in a particular place. So we're not talking about simple systems, because there you can treat actors and factors like institutions, infrastructure in an isolated way. No, we learned that understanding entrepreneurship, you really need to take into account the interdependence of those elements, of those actors, because otherwise you lose the explanatory power of what is happening, or the understanding of what's happening there. And there's sometimes a misunderstanding that governance means top-down, but it can also be self-organization. So we have this rich work, for example, from Eleanor Ostrom on socio-ecological systems, in which there's a lot of bottom-up governance. And indeed, like my colleague Stefan Mago said, it's an empirical question to what extent it's bottom-up and top-down, preferably positively reinforcing each other and not working against each other. So it's really an empirical question of how this works out. And I see the entrepreneurial ecosystem very much as a framework or an approach for thought and action. So for better understanding what academics do, but also for action. So understanding where your ecosystem stands, what are the strong and the weak elements, and use these insights to have a better view on what to prioritize in a particular context, and how to start a dialogue with stakeholders on what to prioritize. And if there's let's say, convergence on that, what to do, and also how to implement it, which is always very context specific. So in that sense, it's more a sort of a lens that you use for the process of economic development than a blueprint that can be copied anywhere. I think that, at least for me, is the beauty of the entrepreneurial ecosystem approach, that it does justice to the specificities of context, but with a sort of a more generic framework that we as academics can also use to have a conversation with each other in different continents, in different contexts, but also have a conversation with practitioners that have a lot of useful local knowledge and that have the task to improve the ecosystem, ultimately to get more productive entrepreneurship and welfare.
So if I could just follow up on that, Erik, if I think about some of those players, if I think about a micro loan program that exists, or an incubator, or a training program put on by an NGO. In what sense is that a system?
Yeah, I would say that's not a system. So what I learned from my conversations with people on the ground, mainly in Africa, but also in Europe, in the US and other parts of the world, there has been an excessive focus on projects on the short run. So implementing a microfinance scheme or introducing a particular training. And I would say that is not what an ecosystem is about. The ecosystem is really about having a view on how the actors and factors are developed in a particular context, and also how you can get them together or representatives of them to improve the ecosystem. And there's no silver bullet. We provide a framework which is not perfect, but at least helps with better understanding. And I've been very often asked, well, what is the success factor of an ecosystem? But that's orthogonal to the question what an ecosystem is, because there is no one success factor. Well, I can tell you there's one disaster factor, that is talking about entrepreneurs and not involving them in the process. So that is perhaps the negative side.
So, Stephen, do ecosystems matter in a developing context? Hope Stephen's still with us. There he is.
Disappeared. In a developing economy, ecosystems are very important. They could actually be more important in a developing setting than a developed setting, because in a developed setting, the challenges that you highlighted, like infrastructure, is in place. There is good human development. Resources are well placed in a developed context. But in a developing context, where there is a lot of fragmentation and resources are not adequate, so it's important now to provide an environment, build a landscape that is collaborative, that is supportive. And this can only be provided when we have a sound or a sustainable ecosystem. Because if these actors are adequately supported, it could be financial support, it could be other forms of support, they will be able to thrive and sustain their businesses. In one of my researches, I established that entrepreneurs were saying, because with ecosystems, we're saying in the developing context, most of the businesses are informal. So the informal sector is very large. Some countries in the global south have an informal sector which is more than 50%, because the industry is not ticking. So, actually the informal sector is sustaining the economy. In such settings, so you find it's very important now to develop ecosystems so that these businesses can have a form of support. And the actors realize that the players need to be supported. It could be financial support, it could be provision of training, provision of infrastructural requirements, etc. So it's more important in a developing setting than in a developed setting. Although I'm not dismissing that they are also important in a developed setting. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jonathan, in thinking about whether ecosystems matter, and the issue of performance would seem important. When we talk about the performance of an ecosystem, what does that mean?
All right. When we speak about the performance of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, we really mean the outputs of, like, what should be the outputs of entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what actually Erik and Stefan, we have been talking about here, what's the core goal of EEs? For the core goal of the EE is just to foster the productive entrepreneurship. So if you ask me what could be the performance of the EE, I'll tell you the sound productive entrepreneurship. But something what we actually caution here, because when we speak about the performance, this is a short-term goal. A short-term goal. But then the EE should focus on a long-term goal. Now, if we think about the long-term goal, we are trying to look on how productive entrepreneurship would actually contribute to a broader value chain objectives, like these are sustainable development. So we will have to really focus on the ending goals of the EE, speaking about the outcomes, outcome or the impact of the EE, rather than, of course, the performance. Of course, we can think about the performance, but we have to look at how the performance then takes the EE into contributing to a larger goal or long-term goal, which is the sustainable development. And of course, we can ask ourselves, do we have unproductive entrepreneurship? Of course, yes. If we look at most of a developing country or the global south, we see those kind of unproductive entrepreneurship, which actually do not contribute to that larger goal or that broader goal. For example, the necessity entrepreneurship, having entrepreneurial activities for data feeding, like having entrepreneurial activities for rent sinking or tax evasion. We could not actually say like these are productive entrepreneurship. So we really want EE to foster productive entrepreneurship, which actually can contribute to a larger goal of this sustainable development.
So I have to push back a little bit. I find the word unproductive entrepreneurship offensive. Who's to say what's productive? But if we go back to Baumel's original work on productive and unproductive, and what exactly do you mean by an unproductive entrepreneur? If I create a venture and it supports my family and otherwise my family would not be supported, if I create a venture that is enhancing my own human capital, my own human development, how is that unproductive?
Perhaps I may step in here if you allow me. So I think that the message of Baumel is also much more to distinguish between different types of entrepreneurship, and that there are types of entrepreneurship, especially by a narrow elite, that are extractive by criminals, but that share a lot of the traits that we normally associate with entrepreneurship. So being creative, ingenious, not only has to do with innovations, with entrepreneurs that make a living, but also has to do with all kind of other types of behavior that are either directly harmful or indirectly harmful. Think about selling narcotics or environmentally harmful activities. But I agree with you, Mike, that it's not that straightforward what productive means in a particular context. And you can have a strict definition saying that it's only unicorns, high-growth firms, gazelles that are productive, or you can have a very inclusive definition or operationalization of that, saying, well, each activity that contributes to an increase in welfare, and then it's also the farmer or the seller on the street increases welfare and productivity beyond the state of doing nothing, so to say. And also it depends very much if you're standing in Kuwait, Cape Town, Harare, or San Francisco, the same type of activity might be productive in one context and not in the other.
Well, I certainly take the point in terms of Baumel's original work, but it just seems that in a contemporary setting, people are equating necessity entrepreneurship, which is another term I have a problem with, but with unproductive entrepreneurship, if we look at informal sector contributions to GDP in a number of developing countries, it exceeds 50% of GDP. So it's clearly productive. But I don't want to split hairs here. I like what your perspective, Erik, but go ahead, Jonathan. You were going to.
Yeah. I just wanted to put it a little bit clear. Like, maybe we have to differentiate between destructive entrepreneurship versus unproductive entrepreneurship, because we know all destructive entrepreneurship are unproductive, but not all unproductive entrepreneurship are destructive entrepreneurship. So it's a little bit to put it a little bit clear on those terms.
So, Jonathan, if I have an entrepreneur in Guguletu, a township in South Africa, who has a business cleaning waste bins in companies, and it supports his family, but he employs 2 people, so he's not creating a lot of jobs. There's not a lot of innovation going on. There's not a lot of intellectual property. Is that productive?
You have mentioned a couple of stuffs there. If your business already employs some of the people, even if it's one, you already created an employment there. You see, so that would again be considered productive. So for unproductive, we mean those businesses that they do not have this ambition for scaling up or for growing up. Like unnecessary, the necessity entrepreneurship. And sometimes we try to look at the end. So a person would have really this ambition to scale up a business, but again, being constrained with a lot of stuff. So in one point would be still remaining at unproductive stage, but then having this tension or having this ambition to grow up, where then that can be taken to a stage which we consider productive, more productive.
Yeah. Perhaps, Michael, I can give an example here. So a few months ago, I was in Lagos, Nigeria, and I talked to the founder of Green Hill Recycling, Mariam, the founder of one of the most successful recycling firms in Nigeria. And why would we like to elevate her above all the other individual collective garbage seekers? Well, I think she developed a business model in which she could be much more effective with a smaller set of people, also because with the skills she achieved, she could also sell the garbage that she collected and also sell it with a higher price. So her initiative and business model, and also stamina, and also the actors that she could mobilize to scale up her business, made her activity in the recycling industry much more productive than the 1,000 individual collectors. So in that sense, if we are in the business of improving entrepreneurial ecosystems, I would prefer that people would work with Mariam in Green Hill Recycling and make a better living with a better income to create a cleaner environment, than having 100 informal garbage collectors that barely make a living and also don't make progress in their life with income that also can pay for their children's education, etc., etc. So that, I think that gives a bit the nuance that it's not black and white, but some activities are more productive than others, so to say.
I take the points, certainly. A few years ago, Don Karadko and I published a book that distinguished what we called survival, lifestyle, managed growth, and aggressive growth ventures. Obviously, one could use other categories, but my question is, should ecosystems embrace all of those types of ventures, some of which some might label unproductive, especially when we talk about the global south, or should they be more focused on the managed growth and aggressive growth kinds of ventures? And how do you know what's going to become a growth-oriented venture? because of the emergent nature of entrepreneurship. So, Stephen, how inclusive should ecosystems in the global South try to be?
Yeah, so the complexity of the entrepreneurial ecosystems is based on the context of economies in the global South. Like I said earlier on, they don't have enough in terms of resources. There are a lot of gaps, and entrepreneurs are, fragmented. So there is no collaboration. So you find that that's why many authors that have written on entrepreneurial ecosystems, from a theoretical perspective, they want to use the complex adaptive systems to say, how do we understand this concept from a complex adaptive systems? Because of that complexity, it's a bit difficult now to say these entrepreneurial ecosystems should strictly focus on one sector and leave other activities, because of the complex interplay between the formal and the informal sector. Where you also find that, because even in your introduction, you also highlighted the issue of policy. How does policy come in? So government as an actor, how does it support these entrepreneurial ecosystems? Now you find situations where the economy has to deal with waste. How do we deal with waste? Like what Erik was saying, that example, how does waste contribute to economic development? How do we bring that sector into the economy? So the complexity is that we cannot now, we need to be inclusive by literally considering all the sectors of the economy. But policy should also come into the picture to make sure that there are no illicit activities. So the activities should also be ethical. It might be in the formal sector or in the informal sector. They should be controlled to remain ethical. So that's the element of the regulation that you mentioned earlier. How are those systems regulated? So for sustainability purposes also, they need to be regulated and to ensure that every player is fairly treated. Every player has got a fair share of the business environment. So yeah, so that's the complexity, but it has to be inclusive. We cannot say we leave out certain sectors of the economy, as long as they are able to contribute to the economy in one way or the other. They should be considered into as players. So that's my contribution.
Understood. Yeah. So Erik, what I'm hearing, and I may be hearing incorrectly, of course, but is that there is no prototype for an ecosystem, and what represents a productive ecosystem is totally context specific. So how does this guide this heterogeneity? How does this guide us in fostering an ecosystem in a particular context?
Yeah, I think there are at least two answers to that. So the simple answer is let's stand on the shoulders of giants before us and use all the insights we have on entrepreneurship and economic development, try to summarize all this knowledge and put it into a framework that is communicatable, that makes sense, and that can be used both by academics and by practitioners. So to be honest, that's what we try to do in the past 10 years. And that gives you a framework that is generic, but it's also a lens that enables you to see the context specificities in each and every context. So the good thing is it does not have one gospel saying you should have more microfinance or more venture capital and then everything will be right. No, it says there's microfinance, venture capital might be important, but there's also the rule of law, there's corruption, there is education, there is leadership, there are networks, etc. So there's a relatively big set of actors and factors that need to be in place for productive entrepreneurship to flourish. So I think that's the good news. The bad news, and I've been especially collaborating with African scholars in the last 5 years, is that of course this framework, and I'm self-critical here, is based mainly on European and American research. So I think it's a bit dangerous to assume that all the knowledge we have harvested within 2 continents is directly applicable to other continents. Not that people are completely different, but of course the context, situation, etc., is likely to be different. And that made us decide, for example, for the African Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Index that we have developed over the past years, to not have a lot of attention to knowledge, which, for example, if you want to copy Silicon Valley, you need to have more R&D and more world-class universities. But in Africa, put this into one basket of human capital development, which seems to be more logic, especially if you look at, for example, literacy rates in Chad, South Sudan. These are 30%. So this is much more a challenge than in Silicon Valley. Not that literacy is not important in Silicon Valley, but there you also already have literacy rates of 90 to 100%, so to say. So you need to weigh the elements. The elements might be slightly different. You have to measure them differently. For example, energy supply is of a different constraint in the Netherlands than in Nigeria. In Nigeria, they have used to live with a lack of energy supply. Well, in the Netherlands, if there's 1 minute no energy supply, it seems to be a national disaster, so to say. So these are different things that you need to take into account. And perhaps as a final mention here, also the global South or Africa, of course, is not one homogeneous box. So I just mentioned Chad, South Sudan with a literacy rate of about 30%, but in Egypt, South Africa, Mauritius, the literacy rate is almost 90%. So that is a completely different story again. And I think the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the approach enables you to have a broader, bigger view, bigger picture on the context of entrepreneurship than all the similar approaches that have been developed until now. So it stands on the shoulders of giants before us, but in a slightly different, more integrated way, if I may say so.
So if I could just pursue that a little bit, if I take some of the countries that you're mentioning, or in Colombia or Guinea or wherever, the entrepreneurial, I guess my question is it a sort of a universal notion, even if it's structure and design and components are context specific, or in a given region or country, do we need different ecosystems to support different kinds of entrepreneurship?
Maybe if Erik, before we start, I can put some thoughts here. As Erik said, and in one way or another, I would agree with Erik. We have to stop this notion of demonizing some of the thoughts from the global north. They are pretty good. I support them because they lay theoretical foundation. If you ask me, entrepreneurial ecosystem, they are all theoretically, we have like a theoretical model of how this EE should look like. So what's the difference is functionality of the EE. So what we can put much emphasis here is on the functionality of the EE. Okay, we all consider about the governance, the culture, or the infrastructure, or whatever. How do these components differ from one country to another? How could we apply them pretty well? For instance, you asked the question of how much EE would be inclusive in terms of considering these typologies of ventures. I remember when I started researching the EE, I came across one study which actually was done in Europe. It actually wanted the EE to focus on scalable and growth ventures, like the productive entrepreneurship. The all efforts should be centered on scalable and growth entrepreneurial ventures. But when you come to global south, for instance, from my country, Tanzania, and most of African countries, we don't have much of this scalable and growth ventures. But we know that even Rome was not built in one day. So there must be a starting point. So the role of EE is just to identify these nuances, these points. Like, okay, in our country, we have more of let's say, unproductive ventures or ventures which are still at the lower stage. How could we take them far? How could we make them actual scaling up or growth-oriented ventures? And that would be the efforts or the initiative of the EE. But again, that's a little bit different, because if I put the context of culture, the culture differ. If you ask me, most of growth house countries and even in Africa, and something which I would table today, like to be most important to a global south country to pay attention on, like the effort of EE, should look on how we can boost the entrepreneurial culture. And within entrepreneurial culture, here I would speak much of the trust, the role of trust. And I've been trying to, researching how EE in global north and EE in global south differ. In most of the time, we differ in the notion of trust. Can we trust each other? Can institutions be trusted? Even entrepreneurs themselves, who are the folk of the EE, can they be trusted? Because there's no venture capitalist who can put money in a venture without an assurance of those money coming back. You see, so I would say that the EE should be more specific in looking on the functionality of these components. We don't need like another rocket science EE framework that could define. It's all the same, but then what could be the functionality of this EE, these frameworks? That would be most of the important nuances on how actually they operate in different areas.
Understood. So functionality. Erik, you have talked in some of your research about the quality of an ecosystem, and the idea that we can measure the components of an ecosystem. What do you mean by the quality of an ecosystem?
Yeah, so first of all, you can have endless discussion whether there is or is no ecosystem. So I decided not to be a bit more pragmatic and not treat it as a dummy variable, but as a continuous variable. So I think that's the main lesson.
Yeah.
And to really make it measurable. So of course we can't measure it all. I always say to my students and to others in the ecosystem sphere, this is not rocket science, because then we could compute with precision on how to get more entrepreneurship with one intervention. It's social science. So we talk about social systems that also have interpretation. So it's a bit more difficult than rocket science. On the other hand, we can measure all these elements and also their interdependence. So you can measure, well, what I just talked about, the literacy rate. So if the literacy rate is higher, it's more likely that there will be more productive entrepreneurship than if the literacy rate is low. If there's there's good access to internet, it's likely that there will be more opportunities for digital businesses. So many of these elements, so for example, for the African Entrepreneur Ecosystem Index, we have 7 elements, so we measure this with 20 indicators. We would like to have somewhat more and better indicators, but 20 indicators is already quite a set of dimensions of being able to measure the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And Of course, you can apply all kind of mathematical or computation methods to then compute the quality, and we've done that. And let's say if you use different algorithms, they have slightly different outcomes. But lo and behold, they're sort of point in the same direction. And that means that you can measure the overall quality of the entrepreneur ecosystem, although honestly, I don't find that too interesting, because then you get a sort of a horse race. Who has the best entrepreneur ecosystem? Yeah, then so what? If you're the best, you can cherish. If you're the worst, you say we should do much better. But what I think the added value of an entrepreneur ecosystem approach is that it really also allows you to look under the hood of the economy and use all these indicators to see what parts of the economy, of the ecosystem are functioning well, which are not functioning so well. And by having these indicators, they can give you both analytical insights as academics. So what kind of conditions lead to more or less of one type of entrepreneurship versus another type of entrepreneurship, female agricultural entrepreneurship or male creative industry entrepreneurship, or whatever you want to measure. On the other hand, it allows policymakers, investors that are interested in improving the system, a toolbox to look at the system and get into productive conversations with the ecosystem actors, enrich it with their local knowledge, which we sometimes can't measure, to have a good conversation on what is the parts of the ecosystem that are weak and that we can tackle together.
So thank you. Stephen, if I'm hearing this correctly, I could have two ecosystems in reasonably similar contexts, and one is more productive than the other. And so in the one that's less productive, I decide I want to fix it. And yet we're talking about elements that can take decades, if not centuries, to develop. Can you fix an ecosystem?
Yeah, that's interesting. I like what Erik was talking about, the quality of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So it means it's something that can be fixed, because you have asked yourself questions to say within an ecosystem, who benefits from the ecosystem, and what kind of challenges they confront the ecosystem, and what are the opportunities. And then you'll be able to understand the environment, to say what are the challenges and what are the opportunities available, and how can these be put together in order to address the challenges and exploit the opportunities that are available. Identify the actors, identify the beneficiaries. So it means in some cases, an ecosystem might be having members who are missing in the ecosystem. Say, for example, let me give an abstract example to say the financial sector is not part of the ecosystem. You have developed, you have engineered an ecosystem, and you leave out the financial sector. What it means is that there is no capital injection. If you leave out, for example, in a community, if you leave out community leaders, that may have political implications. The community leaders feel that they are not part and parcel of the ecosystem. So they will not support, they will not give it inadequate support. Yet that support from the leaders is needed. They probably have influence on policy. So it means policy, for example, can fix an ecosystem. A sector that is part of the ecosystem, like the financial sector, can help with resources that will fix an ecosystem, because we are looking at these challenges. How do we deal with the challenges? And how do we, so there are challenges on one side, opportunities on the other side. So how do we deal with the challenges, and how do we exploit the opportunities? So it means from that context, it's possible to fix an entrepreneurial ecosystem. It might be dysfunctional, but it can be fixed using policy and other tools.
And just to make sure I understand, if we take Jonathan's home country of Tanzania or South Africa, and you're trying to fix an ecosystem, are you fixing a national system, or are you talking about the ecosystem in a major urban area? Are we talking about, we often see much more underdeveloped ecosystems in rural areas than in urban areas. So what's the unit of analysis that I'm trying to fix?
Remember, in your introduction, also outlined the levels. So we may have ecosystems within a community, right? It could be a village. We may have an ecosystem within a village. So that in that context, you have community leaders, you have community members, and we have the local infrastructure. All those put together may
We're losing
an
you.
ecosystem. But we also have, you also need an, can you still hear me? Hello?
You're in and out, but I don't know if it would help to turn the camera off.
Okay, let me turn my camera off. Probably the bandwidth is struggling, but can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, let me turn off my camera. Okay, so I was saying, at macro level, at national level, you find that we still need policies, national policies, who have an impact on activities that are taking place at community level. So the fixture can come from, it can be at national level, where you're fixing issues like policy, or fixing the entire sector, for example, the financial sector. So like what South Africa is trying to do is, their effort is to ensure that the Black communities are also empowered. They have access to the financial sector. Because of the historical disadvantages, they were not able to access the financial sector. So at that level, at a higher level, it's helping the community entrepreneurial ecosystems to benefit from that national policy. So national policies can also influence the local activities. So it depends on the level that we are looking at, but there is that complex relationship.
Thank you. Jonathan, it seems like we're saying that ecosystems, we can measure them, that we can discern their productivity, we can assess their quality, and we can fix them. Is that your view?
Yeah, of course, I was about to contribute on that. When we ask the question of fixing the EE, it goes to the question of structural perspective of the EE. And the structural perspective of EE, here again, we speak about the coordination and governance of the EE. And that's what actually Erik tries to speak about at the beginning. It's still debatable whether should we have a visible hand, like these policies or governments that have a direct control to EE, or should we allow a bottom-up approach, like different stakeholders coming together, or maybe the hybrid of both. of top down and actually the bottom up. So actually, what I would say, it depends on the context. There are some of the contexts where really the coordination of the EE or fixing of the EE should start from the scratch. For instance, if you speak about the developing country, talking about my country, like Tanzania, you can't actually sit there at the top, whether you're a government officer or whatever, and then thinking of having these policies to spur entrepreneurship without going down, meeting with the entrepreneurs themselves and listening at them, what actually hinder their productivity and so it's saying. So it must have like an hybrid model where we have the bottom and people who can really come down, listen to, because as I said, the focal point of entrepreneurial ecosystem is to boost productive entrepreneurship. And who are these actual productive entrepreneurship? Are the entrepreneurs themselves. So all the stakeholders, like all the elements supporting entrepreneurs, should play part on how to fix the EE. But then, how do they come together? That's a question. For instance, if I talk from, if I speak from my country, and most of African country, there's something which I call political will. You know, there must be this political will or governmental will to steer the entrepreneurial system. And by political will, I mean a set of sufficient number of decision makers. By sufficient number of decision makers, I mean it shouldn't be the government officials themselves. They have to be, ready to call upon different stakeholders. Different stakeholders, you mean like, let's say, universities or even as a private organization into the decision-making machinery. Not all that, but we have to agree on a common set of goals. Like we have to identify a common problem. What's a common problem here? Let's say in Tanzania. We have a lot of number of small businesses. If this is a problem and they cannot scale up, how can we scale up? Having them into board, listening at them, and see how we can actually boost them or actually empower them. So I'll in nutshell say, like, fixing or coordinating the EE is something which is again complex and still debatable, but again, the hybrid model would actually make more sense, where all these parties, those with the power and those who are down, coming together, thinking about how we can make this EE more nourishing.
So Erik, you spoke, I want to build on what Jonathan and Stephen have said. You spoke about, I don't know if the word governance is too strong a word, but the notion of, I mean, an ecosystem doesn't have a boss, doesn't have a coordinating office, doesn't have, I mean, as a general statement. And yet you spoke about a top-down and bottom-up approach to achieving maybe more coordination in an ecosystem, if not governance.
Yeah.
What does that bottom-up look like? Or go ahead.
Yeah. Let me give it two extremes to make the case more convincing. So if there would be extreme top-down policies, and I've seen that in China. I was visiting professor at Hangzhou, Zhejiang University in Hangzhou. And if you have a policy of mass entrepreneurship and you say as a national government, everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, I'm not sure whether that is going to lead to the best allocation of talent and also the most flourishing population. So that is one extreme. The other extreme is everybody just takes care of his or her own business, then we might end up in a situation of autarky, in which everybody just does what is good for her own turf, so to say. So I think the middle ground is, yes, we'd like to have a self-organizing system in which people adapt, improve, build upon each other's work, etc. But sometimes there are collective action problems. For example, getting an infrastructure for internet. That is not going to happen if everybody does his own turf. So you need some governance, some and mechanisms for solving collective action problems for which you often need a bit of leadership. And just to give you one example, I've also worked at Cambridge, UK for a while. The Cambridge region, 100 years ago, was just a sort of a rural idyll with a market town and agriculture. But in the 1990s, you had a few entrepreneurs that said, well, this place can really be a much better context for high-tech development. Let's put our hands together. Let's call it the Cambridge Network. And they also embraced the vice chancellor of University of Cambridge. And they really set up a network and a sort of collective action mechanism to have meetings on how can we make this region a better place for high-tech entrepreneurship. Is that top-down? No, there was no government involved and it was not one single leader. Is it bottom-up? Well, it emerged bottom-up, but there's a group of sort of a shared leadership in the middle. So I hope I made it clear that it's not just, it shouldn't be just top-down. That's probably not going to work. Leaving all to the bottom-up, I'm not sure what that will deliver, because there will always be some collective action problems for which you need some leadership. But I think the logic of an ecosystem is that it's very often shared leadership, which is very inclusive.
And Stephen, Erik in his answer mentioned, and the example he gave, the involvement of universities. If we think about the Global South, apart from doing research on ecosystems, what do you see as the role of the university in engaging with ecosystems?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a very important question, because the university plays an important role, a crucial role in society. So universities, normally we have, as part of one of the legs of university is community engagement, where universities must be able to engage with the communities, because universities generate knowledge, and that knowledge needs to be transferred to communities. So that understanding from an academic perspective and from a research perspective, an understanding of entrepreneurial ecosystems, how can that be transferred to communities? So it's important for universities to act by providing such services, research services, knowledge transfer through training or through seminars, symposium, etc., and even conferences that could benefit communities. Because you know, in some instances, we find universities. In one of my previous universities, I was part of the student entrepreneurship group, and they would go to communities now to talk, to provide, you know, discussions on entrepreneurship in the communities. So that, in a way, contributes to entrepreneurial intention, because they are giving awareness to communities about entrepreneurship, and also sharing with them ethical ways of carrying out business activities. So universities can play a crucial role.
I've tried to weave in some of the questions from the chat, but there are a couple that I have not. One of our attendees asked the question, does bureaucracy and red tape have a significant or irrelevant impact on ecosystems and their development? Jonathan, do you have a take on that question?
Exactly. I would say yes. And if I put bureaucracy in the context of, you know, the whole process of starting the business and making this business flourish, it plays a crucial role. And it's like a stumbling block to many of global South countries. And statistics never lie. If you find countries which are actually lagging behind in terms of bureaucracy, or countries which have a lot of bureaucratic, you will find them they're also struggling in terms of their the quality of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, like, if it takes ages for you to formalize your business, for instance, sometimes it's drop you down in terms of your entrepreneurial morale. Or if you have a lot of government officials who are bureaucratic or who are corrupt, sometimes it really hinders the entrepreneurial efforts. So I would say yes, bureaucracy would be one of the a stepping stone, or would be one of the bottleneck to entrepreneurial efforts. And even entrepreneurial ecosystem in a large context. For example, let's say we have some of the actors, let's say funders from outside the country or outside the EE, who wants actually to collaborate with the entrepreneurs in a particular country. How easy is that for them, to operate in a country? There are some of the countries quite hard for the foreigners to come into the country, formalize whatever their activities. It takes ages, and that way actually can slow down the functionality of the EEs.
Thank you. And Erik, we have a question. I would be curious to know what your views are around entrepreneurial support structures. For a government to support at scale, it needs to be ridiculously low cost and then increase the touch points, the cost of delivering support as entrepreneurs prove themselves. Is that something you would concur with or have a perspective?
Yeah. So one word I learned while working in Africa is ESO. I never heard about this word in Europe, but ESO, well, Jonathan, you know what it means?
ESO, Entrepreneurship Support Organizations?
Yeah. So there's really a plethora of actions on initiating, starting, developing ESOs, especially in Africa, but nowadays also in Europe and many other parts of the world. And to some extent, of course, they have different labels in different contexts. But
I use that term a lot in Chicago, I can tell you.
I think the message I want to convey to you, I think it is much more important to have a well-functioning business service sector that enables founders, entrepreneurs to focus on their core business and to outsource all other things that are not part of their core business, than to have ESOs that so-called help entrepreneurs to start and grow their business. Well, they are very often startups themselves. In the African context, are very often donor-driven, with good intentions, don't get me wrong, but they are often a distraction and not really helping entrepreneurs. And to put it even more strictly, and also perhaps echoing a bit what Stephen said, you can establish 100 or 1,000 ESOs in your city, but for Africa, it might be better to have a well-functioning free trade area that might help the entrepreneurs much more than opening up another ESO in your city. Interesting
indeed. Well, I have a bunch more questions, but we are at time. And so I want to thank each of you for taking your time, especially at varying times of the day where you are, and sharing your wisdom and insight. And I thank everybody in the audience for attending, for sharing your questions. I hope you found the session to be informative and helpful. And again, if anybody's interested in the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.